Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's panel, The Future of Global Trade, Supply Chains, and Geopolitics and Economic Resilience. This educational program is developed by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in partnership with DHL Global Forwarding. The association is solely responsible for the development and content of this educational program. The session is open exclusively to international correspondents based in the United States who report for global media outlets. We meet at a time of extraordinary transformation. The global trading system is being reshaped before our eyes by geopolitical realignments, tariff policies, and the aftershocks of both global changes and ongoing regional conflicts. From rerouted shipping lanes to nearshoring strategies and rising demands for sustainability, every link in the supply chain is being put to the test. To help us navigate this complex moment, we are joined by a leader whose perspective is as global as the topic itself. Tim Robertson is the Chief Executive Officer of DHL Global Forwarding Americas, where he oversees more than 7,500 employees across 16 countries, spanning North, Central, and South America. His leadership has been instrumental in shaping DHL's regional strategy, especially in areas like air freight, logistics, innovation, and market growth. Tim brings not only executive experience, but also a truly international career. He joined DHL in 2002, but has held senior positions across Europe, the United States, and Latin America, giving him a panoramic view of global trade in motion. He holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and first-class honors degree in chemical engineering from the University of Sydney, a background that reflects both analytical rigor and strategic depth. He's also received multiple awards for sales leadership and organizational excellence, a testament to both visions and execution. In our conversation today, we'll explore how shifting alliances and trade policies are redefining global commerce, how companies like DHL are adapting their operations to remain resilient, and how innovation and sustainability are now central to the future of freight forwarding. Tim, thanks for being with us today.
Stephanie, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for that incredibly warm and humbling welcome. I couldn't think of as you said, a more interesting time for us to have this discussion together with yourself and your listeners here on the future of global trade.
Of course, Tim, I think this is a crucial moment for the United States where we are reporting right now and also overseas. And let me start with this conversation by asking you, today is August 5th. We are just 2 days away, 48 hours to start this new tariffs policy coming from the United States that will reshape most of the ways that we are used to see trade happening in the world. I want you to tell me what are you seeing right now, especially in this moment that we are facing in politics and commerce and trade around the world?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Maybe just to also for the benefit of your audience here, let me share a little bit about DHL and also the division that I represent so that it really kind of frames the perspective that we have and where I think why we are unique in terms of really seeing how the business is developing, but also firmly in the center of providing solutions for customers in the marketplace. If you move to the next slide here, Stephanie, the DHL Group is the world's leading logistics company. Right, global logistics, as we say, is our passion. We transport, we handle, we store our customers' goods, and so fundamentally, we enable global supply chains, whether that's for large customers, for small customers, regardless of the industry that the customer is in. We're a very unique company in that we have over 600,000 skilled associates operating in more than 220 countries and territories. We're represented by two very strong brands, the DHL brand and also the Deutsche Post brand. And we consist of five strong divisions or business units that you can see here that really cover the full suite of supply chain services and solutions. As it relates to the global forwarding business, if you continue to the next slide, air freight, ocean freight, overland, ground transportation really are the core business of the global forwarding division. We operate in a largely an asset-light model, which gives us a very unique position to be flexible on the ground for our customers and in the markets. We operate some highly standardized transport solutions, but at the same time, we also have multimodal solutions, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. We have sector-specific solutions because industry vertical supply chains are quite different. And we have some very customized services, things like industrial projects and custom services, which have really become at the forefront of the dynamic trade environment that we have today. So if you consider that geographic sort of footprint that we have, our coverage, our product portfolio, and ultimately, as I said, that our global logistics is our passion, we're in such a unique position, I think, to really talk about what we see happening today. Now let me kind of address that opening question. There's a lot of talk about golden ages, and we like to talk about the golden age of uncertainty. And as we approach the date that you mentioned it here, I think there's three areas that we really we see things shaping up right now. There's a cost element, there is a complexity element, and there is an uncertainty element. And I talked about the uncertainty piece, the golden age of uncertainty. I would say on this dimension, while for perhaps many people, they think that, well, things aren't getting more certain because we continue to have announcements that come out every day and changes that happen every day. The reality is that as the trade deals get negotiated and as we get clarity on what those deals look like, that starts to reduce the uncertainty. And I think that is the environment that we're starting to approach. I think a number of months ago, there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty. That uncertainty is starting to abate. I think that is critically important, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, because uncertainty really has risen or driven up many of our customers to have sort of a wait and see strategy before they start to make investments or before they start to make moves. The more certainty you can provide, the quicker you can make your investments. And we'll talk about how that landscape is shaping out also globally, because the rest of the world, quite frankly, isn't really waiting. They continue to move forward and continue to make investments. So clarity is good. We're starting to get certainty. Of course, there's still some big deals that we have to come here, but I think we're going to get some certainty here there also. Now, the complexity is not going away. And that, I think, is one of the key elements here also for your listeners, is that as this highly dynamic trade environment that we're now operating in, complexity has significantly increased. So whether that is customers looking to diversify their supply chains into multiple geographies, or how they manage the constant and the continual updating on tariff rates, on duty rates, on reciprocal tariffs, on retaliatory tariffs. And this is also against a backdrop where enforcement of compliance of tariff and trade is also significantly increasing and at an all-time high level. Managing that compliance in a very high quality way is incredibly important. And we have some customs products and services that we have released into the market to support our customers. But managing complexity is absolutely critical right now. And then the third piece, which I started with, is on the cost side. And the reality is, and I think you start to see it now coming out in whether it's earnings announcements or guidance from multinational corporations about the impact of these tariffs on their businesses, and in many cases they're not insignificant, right? We're now starting to get an indication of what that looks like, and ultimately those costs will be passed on to consumers. They will be potentially absorbed within the supply chain from certain partners, but there are cost increases that are coming, and from a board level perspective, that also is a major priority. How is it that we deal with that? So that is what I would say, Stephanie, to kind of open the discussion. Golden age of uncertainty, cost, complexity, and uncertainty are really the key topics as we approach August 7th.
And Tim, I was reading your slide, and you have air freight, ocean freight, road freight. I just can't imagine how many businesses rely on your services. And when we think about all those businesses, families, employees, I want to know if you foresee an extraordinary reaction within your industry, or has it already begun even before we knew the tariffs would take place on August 7th?
I think, Stephanie, we probably can go back here to the pandemic. I think COVID and the pandemic here really put a spotlight, firstly, on global supply chains and the importance of global supply chains. Supply chains became, I think, a household name. It was, you would tune into any a broadcast, and there was discussions around supply chain and global logistics, and now that has become, I think, an understanding that supply chains are fundamentally important. They're essential to drive global commerce. We're at the heart of that, and at the same time, a number of businesses really, I think, identified the competitive advantage that supply chains can bring. We'll talk a little bit about resiliency, I'm sure, throughout the discussion here, but companies that have developed truly resilient supply chains that can be flexible, that can be sustainable, that can react to these significant shocks that we talk about, whether it's a pandemic or significant a trade action, those companies are in a better position than many of their competition to gain market share in their end markets. So I think the challenge, what we see now, is that the concept of supply chains is actually being used as a negotiating chip, right? This is supply chains are at front and center for many of these negotiations that we see in the trade deals. And I think our industry has been quite well prepared from the days of the pandemic, where we, as I said, we were an asset-light division within the DHL Group. And so we can really flex up and flex down very quickly and go where our customers are. I think one area that I mentioned before that's particularly important is in the area of customs and trade compliance. And this is something, if you're a small or medium-sized importer into the US, whereas in the past, the notion of customs was relatively simple, that has dramatically changed, right? To keep up with each of the different duty rates and stacking or non-stacking tariff, and making sure that you're completely compliant with this, those importers now rely even more heavily on DHL Global Forwarding to ensure that we have highly compliant and seamless supply of products for them into their customers and into their end markets.
What you are mentioning is actually very interesting, because before we move to the actual tariff and commerce policy coming from the US, I would like to go back to COVID-19, the pandemic. I actually found an article that you are an author of, When you said the COVID-19 pandemic showed us how vulnerable our global supply chains are, I want you to tell me if we are moving in the right way, in the right direction to actually be able to move on from those challenges we're facing. It was a pandemic in the past. Now we have a whole different way to see trade as a foreign policy tool, for example. But do you think we have already understood what it means to be so vulnerable in moments of global change?
I think I would say in general, the answer is yes, Stephanie. I think there are many learnings that came out of the pandemic that we already see sort of reshaping global supply chains today. And I'll talk a little bit about China plus one or China plus X here in a minute. But I think maybe firstly, one of the key lessons that came out of the pandemic for us as an organization is the importance of our purpose. Right? Our purpose as DHL is connecting people, improving lives, and that was never more relevant during the pandemic when we delivered over 2 billion with the B doses of vaccines in over 170 countries worldwide. So the purpose that we have there is not just about improving lives. In many cases, it was about saving lives. And I think that purpose-driven notion is something that we as an organization have taken out of the pandemic. And if I think about today's environment, I mean, our connecting people and really enabling trade is a fundamental piece of our purpose. And so, despite the complexity that is happening, we have an obligation to nations, we have an obligation to our customers, we have an obligation to our employees to make sure that we find a way to facilitate trade in an as efficient as manner as we possibly can. And I think that's a motivator for us at DHL. I think one of the key lessons out of the pandemic was around the topic of resilience, diversification of supply bases, China plus one. We recently published a China plus X white paper here that really talked about the importance of diversifying supply bases. And we really do see that happening, right? You see what is happening with the investments over, and this is not just in recent times, but now over the past decade, into markets like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, in this region, Mexico, Colombia, into Eastern Europe, into Africa, to really invest in those markets, into India, for example, to reduce that reliance on a one market sourcing strategy. So we definitely see that lesson happening. I think the other element here that is really fascinating is today we have technology at our fingertips that we didn't have a decade ago or even prior to the pandemic, in terms of how we are using AI and data analytics to help us make decisions, to shape our organization, to move quickly, but also to support our customers. We have a fantastic visibility platform called My DHLi, which has predictive capabilities to allow our customers to really predict what is the estimated time of arrival going to be for a specific shipment, so that we can work with them to choose the best mode, to choose the best shipping route. So I think there's been a lot of learnings there. There's also a lot of additional complexity, and this comes to the complexity dimension that I mentioned. When you're moving, say, sourcing from China into Vietnam or Thailand or Indonesia or Mexico, it's not just about purely production capacity and production quality. You also need to have a clear understanding of what are the transportation requirements. Great example. China has had and still has a significant cargo capacity that moves out of China. That significantly is much greater than those other Southeast Asian markets. So Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. So as you move your production footprint, you also need to take into consideration what is the transportation capacity look like? What is the physical infrastructure also for you to operate in terms of ports, roads, bridges, etc.? What is the labor market like? What is your ability to access skilled talent for you to also support your operations? And then equally important is what is the regulatory environment look like, and how does that foster you being successful? So these are topics that we work with our customers, and many of them did come out of the pandemic here as key lessons. I think maybe an area where we still see concerns is the visibility that many customers have into the second and third and fourth tiers of suppliers in their supply chain. First level, first tier or tier one supply visibility, being able to understand truly inventory levels, parts availability. I think that's incredibly high. But once you get into second and third tier, the data gets fuzzier and customers have less visibility. And when you have now a more global supply chain that may rely on multiple sourcing locations, multiple vendor locations, you're going to have a deeper supplier network, and that second, third, fourth tier visibility is important. We have some tools to help customers with that. Our order management solution is a great tool, but it's an area I think where we have a bit of a blind spot today within global supply chains.
Tim, and now that you mentioned infrastructure, I want to ask you this question. This is in a more global perspective, and then we can go to the regional perspective. But how have recent geopolitical tensions, such as US-China friction and conflicts in Eastern Europe, reshaped trade routes and partner priorities for companies like DHL?
I think certainly if we look at, and there's always geopolitical disruptions that have impacted our business, and it's, as I said, it's something that from an agility perspective we think about every single day, and being able to quickly anticipate and then react for our customers. The conflicts in the Middle East and in Europe have certainly reshaped global air networks and global ocean freight networks, right? And that has had a fundamental impact on lead times for certain products, and means in terms of how inventory needs to be built into supply chains. And I think on the topic of US and China trade relations, and probably more broadly around the tariff topic, I think that has been an even bigger I would say, factor in terms of shaping decision making right now. US China really has led customers, as I've said, to employ that China plus one, China plus X, which for our organization, being as global as we are, with the suite of services that we have, has provided us a lot of opportunities. We've had many customers that we've been able to work with to help them move production lines, for example, from China into Mexico, establish operations in Mexico that they can then use to ship into the United States. Another interesting little anecdote here in terms of how new trade routes and new supply chains are opening up. I was recently in Mexico City meeting with some of our customers, and they said, look, we have a need here because we have freight that goes into Canada, but we supply that through our United States distribution organization. Now we're going to be facing tariffs into the United States, and also the export tariffs into Canada because of a retaliatory perspective. And within a matter of 24 hours, we developed for them a novel ocean freight solution from Mexico into Canada. And that, I think, just shows how dynamic these environments are. These are not fixed networks. These are highly flexible and highly dynamic networks.
And that's what I was going to ask, especially because Mexico is a very particular country in Latin America that is facing in one side, yes, an extension for the tariffs due to the nature of being the first trade partner of the United States, but at the same time having another challenges, maybe internally in the country, as insecurity, for example, in Mexico. So I want to know, in the Americas, what's been your biggest challenge so far, even before the tariffs?
I think in terms of biggest challenge, I think it's really to take advantage of all the opportunities that we see, and we've been operating here in the Americas markets, in Latin America markets, in Central America markets for many decades. So managing in risk, managing it with high volatility, is I think a real core skill that my team has, that manages across those regions, and it's really all about how do we take advantage of those opportunities, and that's the biggest challenge that we have. If there is a challenge, and there I want to point out, to bring it sort of back into the regional frame here. We have a global program called Geographic Tailwinds, and this is a program that looks at we've got this incredibly dynamic trade landscape right now. We've got China plus X. There's all sorts of opportunities out there. We are incredibly well positioned in many of these markets that are going to benefit from those trade dynamics. Let's make sure that as the DHL Group, we are significantly investing in those markets. So here in the region, the three geographic tailwind markets that we have are Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. So I was recently in Brazil a couple of weeks ago with our team, and there, despite the current challenges with the US that Brazil has at the moment, they're seeing tremendous business opportunities, both within the region and also trade from Asia Pacific into Brazil, up a double-digit term, and then also working with Europe into Brazil. And this is now with Europe, we're working on new trade routes from Europe via Asia, via Hong Kong down into Brazil. Colombia, I will be next week with our team there to look again at how we're capitalizing on those opportunities. And I mentioned Mexico. Mexico, for us, is a real shining star within the region. We're 20-30% growth in our core products there in Mexico. Mexico, I think, is seeing strong growth within the region. Mexico being very critical, supplying down into Latin America in certain high value sectors. We recently supported a pharmaceutical customer with 10 air freight charters from Mexico into Brazil to help to help them start up a new production line in Brazil and fill demand that they had there. We're also seeing strong import growth into Mexico out of Asia, and not just out of China, India, Vietnam, Thailand. Strong import growth into Mexico. Mexico is again a critical part of that geographic tailwind, and we're very proud of the presence that we have there. And despite the ongoing dynamic with the US, Mexico is going to continue to be a major trading partner here across not just North America, but equally important, I think, in South and Central America.
And I want to bring up to the table one of the terms you're using actually in this article that I found. You mentioned omnishoring. That's not as popular as nearshoring, offshoring that we regularly listen to. So is what you're mentioning right now regionalization what you mean by omnishoring in the Americas?
Yeah, I think definitely omnishoring here really is also looking at multiple distribution channels to serve the end customers or the end markets. And that, again, is another area that has significantly increased in the complexity in the current environment. And the topic of the abolition of de minimis also brings in a major new dimension there, which historically shippers and customers could use a a duty-free treatment of shipments into the United States here to serve a specific, let's call it omni-channel. I think customers that I speak to still need to have multiple channels for how they serve their end markets. Customers, and this is not just in the United States, but certainly across the region here, customers want to have the ability to buy online. They want to have the ability to buy online at multiple different sites. They also do want to have the ability to shop in store, comparison shop in store, and other distribution models. So there really is the omni-shoring concept is no less important. It's probably now in an even more complex context that we need to consider.
And Tim, how is DHL adjusting to a world where trade policy is increasingly used as a tool of foreign policy or even immigration policy in the case of Mexico? It's hard to think about just one piece of the whole piece when we know that in the same basket there's immigration, security, foreign policy, and now trade policy.
I think, Steph, it's a fantastic and insightful question here. And I would say, if I look at my few decades of proudly wearing the yellow and red, there has never been a time in certainly in my career where what I would call non-market forces, so really bilateral engagement with policymakers on these topics, is absolutely critical. 2 decades ago, maybe even just a decade ago, it was more the market forces that really drove our business. Now, non-market forces and government action are equally important for us to take into consideration. And the approach that we take is to engage. We believe that engagement, bidirectional engagement, is incredibly important. Fortunately, I think our voice, because of the expertise, the credibility that we have, is listened to. We've got great examples where we have worked with the administration here in the United States, particularly within the CBP organization, on shaping cargo security policies to ensure that the end goals are still met in terms of security and compliance, but at the same time making sure that they are operationally efficient, and that these are policies that actually can be implemented by the industry. So we think what you see now happening with trade and tariffs, I think, make it even more important for engagement, for proactive bidirectional, bilateral discussions with policymakers, not just, for example, here in DC, also in Berlin, also in Beijing, also in Mexico City. I mean, this is I think, very important that you have a seat at the table and you help shape what the future looks like, particularly because, as I mentioned, supply chains are now they're a negotiating tool. They're a bargaining tool, and if we are not there to talk about that, I think if the voice isn't heard, then that side is going to be left out in ultimate decision making.
Tim, do you believe the era of global trade liberalization is over or is being reshaped? And if so, what comes next for global logistics?
I think it's being. I'm hopeful that this is being reshaped. I think that's what we're seeing right now. Keep in mind, 14%. It's only 14%. 14% of global imports are into the U.S. destination. So it still is the largest single import destination, but there are still a large piece of the pie out there that can be developing and that can be growing. And I think that's one thing that we're seeing, and this comes back to one of the points I made earlier about uncertainty and about the needing to make investments. What we probably see more so in the US right now is that uncertainty is leading more to a wait and see type strategy, where investments may be either postponed or companies are holding off from making some of those long-term decisions. We're not seeing that elsewhere in the world, right? We're in Latin America, here in Asia. In Latin America, as an example, in Brazil, we will significantly invest in Brazil across all of our divisions so that we can more than triple the size of our business there over the next 5 years. We will invest over 200 million in building up life sciences capabilities for true temperature controlled freight solutions here in Latin America. So we also continue to invest significantly. And I think that is the danger that I see for the US, is that lack of investment right now, as there is this sort of wait and see approach. But like I said, the rest of the world is not waiting, and I think that's more the reshaping now that we see, and more, let's see what the future is of the US as it relates to global supply chains.
So then, Tim, my understanding is that this reshaping is becoming a structural cost for logistics operators.
I think it definitely in the short term is, Stephanie, right? As new trade routes open up that don't have the same amount of volume that you might have from a major trade route, then unit costs are higher. I mean, a good example, that China into US air freight versus Vietnam into US air freight. It's just structurally the unit costs are higher in the short to medium term in this reshaping of the supply chain.
How do you assess, Tim, the current state of supply chain resilience across the Americas? And I want to talk about Americas because it was very newsy, and it was very easy to read about this disruption in the supply chain when the war between Russia and Ukraine was, in the worst moment, and we could see how the disruption, let's say, with gasoline and the rest of the world was actually affecting us. But how was it manifesting in the Americas?
I think this is where that the sort of the regionalization piece that that we have talked about here, where a little bit the strategy of make where you sell and then source where you make. A number of companies have been down that journey here for the past decade. I think they were a little more insulated to what we have seen in terms of disruption, particularly in the Middle East and also in Europe. As we think about resilience, and this is, I think, really the companies and the organizations that build truly resilient supply chains, those that can absorb shocks like we're seeing here today, these are the companies that ultimately will be the winners in the future. And I think we look at it and we have a few different lenses to look through. First, you have to be able to anticipate the disruptions, right? We have a very, this is the global nature of our business. We really can anticipate potential risks that are happening on a global basis or within our network. Then secondly, to adapt real quickly, right? This is also something that I think as a major learning from COVID, the notion of sort of corporate war rooms to get together on a global basis to adapt incredibly quickly and then recover rapidly. I think that's something that we've seen is very important. And then finally, and this I think is where the Americas region is doing really well, is the notion of having supply chains as a competitive advantage. Resilient supply chains that allow you, when maybe a competitor does not have a product available in store, but you do have a product available because you have this highly resilient supply chain and because you have a partner like DHL that you work with, they become enablers for companies to gain market share during disruptive times.
And then we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the issues that we're still facing, and how everything is changing right now. But I want to address also the very ambitious goals that DHL has in terms of sustainability and innovation. And I can read here that the carbon neutrality goal is net zero emissions by 2050. How will that be possible? That sounds like going in the opposite side of, as the, for example, the U.S. administration is trying to go, right? But you need to face what is actually happening around the world. So how are you going in that direction?
I think, Stephanie, thank you very much for that question. It is a fundamental imperative of not just our organization, but also of the industry as a significant emitter of CO2. This is not just sort of a journey that we have started here in recent years. In fact, for the past decade, we have been the front runner of green logistics solutions. We were the first global logistics provider to come out with a Go Green Plus solution that could truly offer a carbon neutral air freight or ocean freight shipment to our customers, not just with offsetting, but with true insetting. We are the market leader in terms of the purchasing of sustainable aviation fuel, which is a critical piece for us here so that we can decarbonize the air freight footprint that we have. We use a book and claim service so that our customers can contribute to that sustainable aviation fuel purchase and allow them to claim back the emissions reduction. So we have all of our facilities, all of our warehouses are all built and developed and designed as to be truly carbon neutral. We are part of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI initiatives. We've been hitting all of the interim targets that we set. As you mentioned, we've got very ambitious target for 2050, and it simply is an imperative that we have to take, regardless of what changes or what changes may be happening from a geopolitical perspective or a non-market perspective. It simply is too important for us. Now, with that said, this is not something that we will do alone. Our customers need to come along with this journey. Our strategic suppliers also need to come along with this journey. And quite frankly, governments also need to come along with this journey to support the overall mission here.
And Tim, everybody wants to know what's going to happen with my job with AI. Everybody wants to know how is it going to help me or how is it going to affect me. So what innovations, whether digital platforms, AI, or automation, are most transformative for the future of global freight forwarding?
I think, Stephanie, I'm incredibly excited about how AI and advanced technologies will be able to support both our customers from a customer experience perspective and make them more successful, and equally excited about how it can support our operators. You mentioned at the opening 7,500 people here in the Americas region. These are, for the most part, vast majority are frontline customer service operators, supervisors that are really dealing with our customers every day, and how we can use technology to improve their life so that they can spend more time, quite frankly, dealing with customers and less time on some of the non-value added activities. A great example of what we are developing, we're releasing it internally this month, and it will come into the market in October and November, is a customs AI agent. So this will be an AI customs agent that will sit aside, and this is incredibly important right now in the highly dynamic trade environment. But a customs agent that our customers will be able to use, also our internal customs operators will be able to use, to work with that agent to help them classify goods quicker, be even more compliant, just to query, hey, if I've got a question, but then also to proactively inform our team, our operator in the morning, hey, keep an eye on this. You've got these 5 shipments coming in. 3 of them had issues with the FDA last week. I think you might want to look at this and speak to the customer to resolve that problem. That's how this technology can empower our frontline operators and improve their life at the end of the day. So I'm incredibly excited about that. That's just one use case, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface here. We talk about digital by default, and ultimately it's really to improve the experience of our operators.
And do you see digital transformation as a tool primarily for efficiency, or can it also be a driver of transparency and trust in global trade?
I think it's definitely both, and I think this digital by default, I think is a great example of that. The efficiency piece, that will come, and that it's a great enabler as we grow our business, because not only do we have ambitious targets for carbon neutrality, we also have some very ambitious growth targets as part of our accelerate sustainable growth strategy. And there we want to be able to use technology for us to grow the business and support our operators in a very efficient way. At the same time, technology can be that same technology will be able for those customers that are truly building resilient supply chains that are AI enabled. They will be able to make decisions much quicker. I give you a good example. At a customer that very close customer we work with for many decades, and they invested in building a digital twin after the pandemic. And this is really a digital version of their supply chain that they can very quickly alter and adjust based on different scenarios. It's really the highest level of scenario planning, and now it can be AI enabled. Now that customer is in the position that when a tariff rate changes or a duty rate changes or a cost per unit on a transportation cost changes, they can very quickly update their digital twin and get outcomes that help them make decisions quickly as to the direction that they should take. That's a great example of where technology is used to really shape a resilient supply chain.
It will be amazing to see what's going to happen in this environment in the next few years. And I want to go to one of the questions that our colleagues are sending to us, Tim. Nikki is asking, what role do you believe the media plays in shaping public perceptions of trade, wars, tariffs, and global economic tension?
I think Stephanie, you may be even better to answer that question than I am. But I think and that's where a session like this comes in. It's about educating the media. It's about educating journalists. It's why we do these kind of outreach sessions, so that that the media can be well informed to then help really report on the news that matters, but also do that with a really informed view of how, in this case, what is the future of global supply chains? What do we mean when we talk about resiliency? And so DHL will always be engaged in these kinds of media outreach, which is about improving education and being part of that discussion.
And Tim, I am a reporter in Washington, D.C., so I'm inevitably political most of the times. So I don't know if you can answer to me this question, but what are governments across the Americas doing right or wrong when it comes to supporting economic resilience through trade infrastructure?
I think it's probably not I wouldn't be in the best position to say what they're doing right and wrong. What I would say, Stephanie, is that where we have intense sort of bidirectional engagement, in those cases, we almost always find that those administrations, that those policymakers, that they're listening. They are very interested. They really want to understand how supply chains work, how it can impact consumers, how it can impact economic development, and how it can improve really the success and the competitiveness of those nations. And so my message there would be just to continue to listen and to continue to engage in that bilateral, bidirectional discussion. The decision they take may be one that's different in the end, but to engage, I think, and speak to the experts is mission critical.
Here we have another question from Handelsblad. The question, Tim, what's your greatest fear and biggest hope for what comes next in global trade?
Greatest fear. Look, I think as I said in the cost, the complexity, and the uncertainty, the getting the uncertainty that we all need here, that businesses need, so that they can continue to make investments. Getting that resolved, I think, is I wouldn't say it's a fear, but it's something that is absolutely essential, because that then leads to, I think, where the hopes are. And the hopes are here. Globalization and global trade has been undoubtedly a major driver of prosperity for billions around the world, for improving economic development, for improving economic conditions. And my hope, and of course, this is why at DHL our purpose is connecting people and improving lives, is that we can play a major role in continuing to see the benefits of global trade, even if it is reshape, but continuing to see the benefits of that for the prosperity of humanity.
Great, Tim. So I would say that this conversation has actually brought a lot of new information for us in our daily reporting. So we really appreciate you taking the time to doing this with all of us. And I don't know if you want to say something to the audience. I'm sure so many reporters who are still waiting to understand better, trying to understand better the way everything is moving so fast, reshaping, aligning. This will be very useful.
Yeah, I think, firstly, Stephanie, thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue. I hope it has been useful. I think it's a very, it's a topic we could talk for hours and hours about. It's highly dynamic. It's highly, it's changing at a rapid pace. We talked a lot about cost, about complexity, about uncertainty. That's kind of the lens that we look at things. Let's hope that that as these trade deals come out, we're going to get we're going to get some of that uncertainty taken away, so that companies can continue to invest also here in the United States. We as DHL, I think, are uniquely positioned to help manage the complexity, to manage through some of the cost challenges. And ultimately, I think the future of global supply chain really lies in flexible, sustainable structures that enable resilience. That's the key piece here. And at DHL, we are uniquely positioned to power that future.
Thank you so much, Tim. Tim Robertson is Chief Executive Officer of DHL Global Forwarding Americas. He oversees more than 7,500 employees across 16 countries, spanning North, Central, and South America. This educational program is developed by the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents in partnership with DHL Global Forwarding. This program is exactly what we've been seeing, is a way to educate journalists, and the association is solely responsible for the development of this program. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, Stephanie. Pleasure.